Hey everyone! So when you think about biblical law, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's that classic image, right? Moses, the mountain, 2 stone tablets, a single, unchanging set of rules. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the reality of biblical law is way more dynamic, more complex, and honestly, more revolutionary than we've ever been told? Let's get into it.
All right, to kick things off, I've got a question for you, and it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. How many different versions of the 10 Commandments are actually in the Bible? Now, most people would probably say 1, maybe 2 if you've really done your homework. But the real answer, well, it might just surprise you.
The answer is 3. Yep, that's right. There are 3 distinct, different versions of the 10 Commandments in just the first 5 books of the Bible. And that little fact right there, that's our key. It unlocks a totally new way of seeing what biblical law was all about. See, it wasn't just one book, it was a whole library.
And that brings us to this first big idea. We have to get past the myth of the law. This idea that it's all one single thing. What scholars have figured out is that the text we read today was actually woven together from a bunch of different sources over hundreds of years. And the legal stuff is no different. It's not a single code. It's a collection of legal traditions.
Just look at how this breaks down over time. You've got the earliest laws from what's called the JE source popping up in Exodus. Then centuries later, you get 2 more massive collections, the priestly laws in Leviticus and Numbers, and the Deuteronomic laws in, well, Deuteronomy. But here's the genius part. Later editors took all of these different law codes from different eras and placed them all into the single story of Moses at Mount Sinai. It was a masterstroke that gave every single law, even the later ones, the incredible weight of ancient divine authority.
And inside this library of laws, you find 2 totally different styles. First, there's what's called casuistic law. It's basically case law. If this happens, then that is the punishment. You see this style everywhere in the ancient world, like in the famous Code of Hammurabi. But then you get apodictic law, and these are absolute, straight-up commands. You shall not. No ifs, ands, or buts. This direct, powerful style is a unique signature of Israelite law.
And here is a perfect example of how even the most core laws could change. Just look at the reason given for observing the Sabbath. In Exodus, it's theological. You rest because God rested after creating the world. But fast forward to Deuteronomy, and the reason is completely different. It's about social justice. You rest because you need to remember you were once slaves in Egypt and God freed you. It's the same command, but with a totally different reason at its heart. The text was alive. It was fluid.
And get this, it gets even wilder. That third version of the 10 Commandments I mentioned, it's sometimes called the Ritual Decalogue, and it has almost nothing in common with the one we all know from the movies. It's all about festivals and offerings, and not marrying foreigners. So here's the big question. If the laws themselves could be adapted and changed over time, what was the one, unchanging, radical idea that held it all together?
Well, that question brings us to the absolute core of this whole thing. The single biggest difference between biblical law and every other legal system in the ancient world isn't about the specific rules. It's about something much more fundamental. It's about authorship. It's about who gets to stand up and say, this is the law. Listen to this quote from the Code of Hammurabi, the most famous law code from ancient Babylon. It's the king talking in the first person. I wrote my words, the law which I enacted. He couldn't be clearer. In Babylon, the king is the source of the law, period.
But now, compare that to what you see in the Bible. It's a completely different story. The text says over and over again something like this. Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Moses is never the lawmaker. He's just the secretary. The law always, 100% of the time, comes directly from God.
This idea has a name, divine authorship. And believe me, this one single idea changes absolutely everything. It is not just some small theological detail. It has massive, earth-shaking, real-world consequences for what law is even for. It basically redesigns society from the ground up. So what does happen when God is the one making the laws? Well, for starters, the very idea of law just explodes. It's no longer just about keeping people from stealing from each other. It becomes about shaping the entire moral character of a nation. So let's unpack just how revolutionary this idea really was.
Okay, so this divine authorship leads to at least 4 huge shifts. First, law and morality become the same thing. Every crime is now also a sin against God himself. Second, the law starts reaching into areas no human government could ever police, like your thoughts and your feelings.
Third, caring for the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, stops being a nice suggestion and becomes an actual legal requirement. And finally, and this one is massive, it establishes a brand new principle of equality for everyone under the law.
And think about this for a second. You shall not bear a grudge. Love your fellow as yourself. I mean, can you imagine a king or a Congress trying to pass a law like that? How would you ever enforce it in a court? You can't. The only thing that backs it up is that final line, I am the Lord. God is the only one who can see into the human heart, so His law is the only one that can command it. This brings us to one of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood phrases in legal history, an eye for an eye. We hear it today and we think of brutal, primitive revenge. But in its original context, it meant something completely different, something shockingly progressive.
Look at the difference. In the Code of Hammurabi, justice was all about your social status. If a nobleman poked out a commoner's eye, he just paid a fine. No big deal. But biblical law makes this unbelievable declaration. You shall have one standard for the stranger and the citizen alike. An eye for an eye wasn't a command to get revenge. It was a radical statement of legal equality. It meant the punishment must fit the crime, and it doesn't matter one bit if you are rich or poor, powerful or weak. You know, you can learn almost everything you need to know about a society by looking at what it punishes most harshly. And when you put biblical law side by side with its neighbors on this point, you find a total flip of priorities, a truly revolutionary new way of thinking about what matters most. Okay, this is just stunning. It is a complete 180. In other ancient codes like Hammurabi's, if you stole something, you could literally be put to death. Property was that important. But if you murdered someone, oftentimes you could just pay off the victim's family with cash, a monetary ransom. The Bible flips this completely on its head. Stealing, you pay back what you took, maybe double, your life isn't on the line. But murder, that becomes the ultimate crime, one that no amount of money can ever fix.
So the principle is incredibly clear. In the biblical mindset, human life and property aren't even on the same scale. A crime against property gets settled with property, but a crime against a human life, a life made in the image of God, that's an infinite offense. Human life is sacred, it's priceless. Property is not.
And the text doesn't hide this principle. It shouts it from the rooftops. This verse from Numbers makes it crystal clear. You cannot accept a cash payment for murder. It's not just a crime against a family that can be bought off. It's seen as a crime against God that defiles the entire land. Life is not a commodity. So let's pull all these threads together. First, we've seen that biblical law isn't one static book, but this living library of texts. Second, its core claim, the thing that makes it tick, is divine authorship. Third, that one idea leads to these radical new concepts of morality, justice, and equality. And finally, all of this points toward a very unique goal.
Because the goal here wasn't just to create a stable, orderly society like Hammurabi wanted. The purpose of biblical law was to actually sanctify an entire nation, to mold its character, to make it holy, in the image of its divine lawgiver. The laws were a blueprint for creating a holy nation, set apart by its ethics and its unique relationship with God.
And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. These ancient texts, with all their complexities and their radical ideas, they really challenge us to think about what law is even for. So I'll leave you with this question to ponder. What happens when a society's laws aim not just for order, but for holiness?